Hey everyone, so for this tutorial I used real sunflowers and made these really cool bookends. Let's go back and check them out because I didn't use a pressure pot and this thing came out so gorgeous and bubble free. Real quick, here is where you can find me when I'm not making YouTube tutorials. Okay, I slowed down this to explain exactly what I'm doing. I just put the completely dried out flowers inside these bookends to try to figure out how I like their placement. They're not glued down, they're not held down by anything, they're just sitting there. Now to get bubble-free results, you have to pour this in layers. For my first layer, I just wanted a touch of glitter, and the glitter I use is from Let's Resin. I will also link that down below. Now this resin has already been mixed, so it's been sitting on my heating mat just to make sure all the bubbles come out. It is also from Let's Resin, and while I'm naming Let's Resin, these bookend molds, are also from Let's Resin. Now the whole purpose of layer 1 is to basically get the flowers anchored down so they don't float up when you're pouring your other layer. If you incorporate like glitter or a color, then it's really important that you don't actually pour it on top of the flowers so that you don't cover them up. Also, the best pouring technique is to pour at the lowest point and allow the resin to float up. It just allows the bubbles or anything to float up and not get trapped. You want to wait to pour the next layer until the first layer is tacky. Now mine is a little bit too hard. I should have poured it sooner. For the second layer, you don't have an issue of the flowers moving around anymore, but like I said, you really want to pour on the lowest point and allow the resin to flow up into the flowers. This helps push all the bubbles out of all the little crevices and petals. When trying to figure out how much resin to use for each layer, it's important to read what your resin states for a depth maximum. So for example, if it says the depth maximum is 1 inch and you pour, say, 2 inches, you can actually have your resin overheat and it will completely ruin your piece. It will bubble, it will expand, and it will start releasing toxic fumes. So this is a super important thing for you to know. However, if I was using this in a pressure pot, in my experience, I have not had issues with pour maximums and minimums because it all gets compressed and it is cured under pressure. The whole point of this video was for me to show you how you can get bubble-free results in just layers though, because not everybody has a very expensive pressure pot. If you are, however, wanting to do lots of florals, I cannot recommend pressure pots enough. I am in love with mine. Now I'm on the final layer in the mold. After I demold, I actually do go ahead and pour another layer. That is just to make it glossy and to give it a really nice appearance. I will say, going this method, you have to have a ton of patience because you don't get instant results, and this is hours and hours and hours of mixing and pouring resin. However, when I demolded this, I was super happy with the results. This was the first time I actually ever used this mold, and I decided to go ahead and pour water in it to try and separate the resin from the silicone. Now, you don't have to use water, this is just a preference, but I find it helps a ton. Another thing to look out for is after you demold this, the edges can be kind of sharp, so please be careful when you're demolding your pieces. At this point, I went ahead and sanded down the edges. This is just so that when the resin flows over the top of it, it just has a nice smooth appearance. Now for this step, I'm just pouring on liquid latex. The purpose of liquid latex is so that when you are pouring resin on the opposite side of your piece and it starts to drip down, the drips just pop right off. There's no sanding or cutting needed. It just saves a bunch of time in the end. I have seen people use Elmer's glue or painter's tape, but my favorite is liquid latex. If you're using this for like a gift for somebody that has a latex allergy, you might have some issues running into that, but just make it very aware to whoever's receiving it that you did use latex and to use caution when touching. The only drawback that I have found to using liquid latex is it actually takes forever to dry, but once it has dried, go ahead and add your layer of resin. I will go ahead and give some quick tips on how to get a really good dome finish. One is go ahead and mix your resin together and actually let it set for about 10-15 minutes or so. You really want to just watch it and feel it through the outside of the cup. If it feels warm to you through the outside of the cup, then it is definitely time to pour it. The longer that resin sits, it actually thickens up into a honey consistency, and this allows it to slowly just kind of spread out and even itself out. Versus the really runny resin that you get in the beginning, it's just harder to control and it kind of honestly does a terrible job at doming. To get rid of the lines on the side of the bookends, I go ahead and just use my gloved finger and run it along them to smooth it out. I have seen people use paintbrushes to go ahead and smooth out the lines, but I just find it easier to use my glove because I don't have to try to clean out resin out of bristles and the paintbrushes, and I don't have to throw the paintbrush away, so I'm actually helping on reducing waste. The gloves that I'm using are actually really thick nitrile gloves, and when the resin cures, I can pull the resin off the gloves and use these gloves multiple times, so that makes me super happy on reducing waste. When you're done pouring your resin on, you kind of have to eyeball it for a while because the resin will start to pull away in some places. You can actually see it pulling away on the right bookend mold. This could be due to oils from my fingers, and what a lot of people do before they do their top coat is they actually sand the piece. This is optional. It actually does help grab onto the resin whenever you're wanting a nice clean dome. I, however, just did not feel like sanding the entire piece. It could also be because my work surface is not level. If you are able to level your surface, I highly recommend it. It saves so much in time when you have to go back and fix your mistakes. Now to pop surface bubbles, I did go over it with a torch just really quickly. I didn't want to burn the resin and I didn't want to scorch it, but now I just go ahead and let this sit here and cure. Now my go-to is usually using a pressure pot when I use florals. However, I was super impressed with the results that I got from just doing this layering method. However, you can see the layers just very slightly. But the whole purpose of this was to get a bubble-free result, and I think I did a pretty good job at that. So I definitely recommend pouring in layers and using really good epoxy resin like Let's Resin. These bookends I am actually going to add to my Etsy. I am going to sell them, so if you are in love with them as much as I am, they will be available, and I have my link down below. Thanks so much for watching, and if you haven't already, please feel free to subscribe to my channel. I have a ton of cool ideas.